Don't climb a mountain when it's snowing for the first time. Do you climb mountains? Mountaineering is an outdoor sport that can be easily done by anyone, but it is always fraught with danger. This is even more so when it comes to winter mountains. This time, I would like to share a scary story about snowy mountains. Don't climb a mountain when it's snowing for the first time. We often heard such stories in our circle of friends, but the one of man we knew who foolishly thought it was because it would make them slippery were in mortal danger. He was an inexperienced amateur climber with only about 3 years of experience, but he had a competitive personality and didn't like to rely on others. He is the type of person who does everything by himself, and at that time he was climbing a winter mountain by himself, but the first snow had started to fall. The snow was only a few centimeters deep, so he continued climbing as he had originally planned. The snow made it difficult to find the trail, so he began to climb cautiously, but began to feel uneasy. As he walked, looking for the path, he noticed footprints. He patted his chest and thought, "I'm sure this is the right trail," and started walking at a good pace again. However, there was something that bothered him about the footprints. They were not mountaineering boots in the least. They were obviously too thin and small. As it was, he began to follow the footprints up the mountain, but he began to notice that the scenery around him was a little different from what he had seen before. It was more like an animal trail than a mountain trail, and the rocks and thickets were becoming more and more difficult to walk on. He was also concerned about the eeriness of the footprints he had been using as a signpost, so he decided to turn back. It was getting dark and he was getting impatient. As he hurried down the mountain, relying on his own footprints, he noticed something strange. Those thin footprints were increasing. When he was climbing, there was only one footprint, but now there were several. At least now he can see the footprints of 3 people. Moreover, upon closer inspection, they looked like the footprints of bare feet. When he noticed them, a shiver ran down his spine and he was struck with fear. Something was following him, and it was barefoot. At that moment, he remembered the words of an experienced climber he knew. Don't go climbing on the first snow day. You'll see things you shouldn't see. You can see things that you normally can't, thanks to the snow. It can be fatal. He was beginning to panic. It was getting dark, he was being followed by something unidentifiable and barefoot, and he was lost. He quickly started down the mountain, following his footprints. But no matter how far he walked, he could not get back to the trail. The sun had already set and his footprints were indistinguishable. He's lost. The word lost came to his mind, but he decided to give up the idea of going down the mountain today and stay in the field. He hadn't prepared for camping, so the only things he could use were a thermal cover like aluminum foil and matches. He decided to camp under a large rock where the wind would be sheltered. It was quite cold, but it was a mild night after the snow had fallen. He didn't think he would have to worry about freezing to death, but he decided not to sleep just in case. As he calmed down, the thought of footprints came to mind. What were those footprints? They must have been deer, rabbits, or wild boar. He tried to disguise his thoughts and interpreted them as the footprints of a small animal. He tried hard not to sleep, but he fell asleep because of the tiredness of the day. After a while, he was awakened by a noise. It was the sound of something walking on the snow. The sound was coming from behind the rock he was leaning on. Thinking it was a small animal, he shouted to get rid of it. "Hey! He shouted, and the footprints fled into the distance. I knew it was a wild boar, he thought to himself. A few minutes later, he heard the footprints again from a distance. This time, the footsteps were different. They weren't the footsteps of one person. He brought his friends with him. As expected, he felt fear. "Hey!" he yelled again with all his might. The footsteps stopped, but after a moment, they started moving again. And they were heading straight towards him. At this point, he couldn't believe that they were small animals, but he couldn't help but think that they were human or something else. There are multiple footsteps coming towards him. He was more terrified than he had ever been. He sat down in the gym, meditated, and began to pray. He wasn't particularly religious, but he remembered his grandfather and grandmother chanting the Buddhist prayers when he was a kid. He pulled a thermal cover over his face and chanted a messy prayer while trying not to look outside. But he could still hear the footsteps. They were getting closer and closer. The footsteps continued throughout the night, as if they were circling around him. He couldn't sleep at all and was chanting half-crazed Buddhist prayers, when it gradually became brighter and he realized that the morning sun was rising. The sound of footsteps gradually became more distant, and he felt relieved. He was relieved when the footsteps became completely deafening and he fearfully poked his head out of the thermal cover to look around. There were dozens of footprints all around him, and they were bare footprints. He stared at them in exhaustion. He was too terrified to think about anything else, but he started packing and started to descend. After half an hour's walk, the footprints disappeared in the middle of the trail, but after a short walk, the sign for the trail was easily seen and he descended safely. He had a mental breakdown and stopped climbing after this. What were the creatures that were chasing him? That remained an unsolved question, but I had no desire to find out on his behalf. Thanks for watching this video. How did you like this story? If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. If you have any feedback on this video, please leave me a comment down below. I'll see you in the next video.